There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a building when leadership changes. It isn't loud. It's cautious, like the walls are waiting to see what happens next. That Friday morning, the hallways of Elridge and Company were unusually quiet. Not in the comforting way. No, this was the kind of silence that made people walk faster, speak softer, and glance twice over their shoulder. I had worked there for 9 years, long enough to understand what silence like that usually meant. The CEO, Richard Elridge, was taking a medical leave after an unexpected surgery. Temporary. That's what the memo said. A brief pause for recovery. It sounded reassuring, but anyone who had worked in corporate long enough knew that temporary could become permanent the moment the board smelled a new direction. And the new direction had a name. Chase Elridge. Richard's son. He was 31, tall, tan, and always dressed like he was attending a startup pitch event. No tie. Slim fit suits. Perfect hair. He'd interned with the company for one summer 6 years ago and apparently believed that was enough to run it. The board agreed. Or at least pretended to. Nepotism had its own kind of gravity. Chase was announced as interim director, but the word interim faded quickly from everyone's vocabulary. He walked in like he'd already won. And technically, he had. I watched from my small glass-walled office near the Translation and International Relations Department. Not a flashy space, but quiet, private, and with just enough of a view of the main lobby to observe everything without being seen. That suited me. My work was built on quiet observation, listening, absorbing, decoding not just words, but intention. I speak 7 languages. Not just conversational phrases, but fluency. Business-level understanding, cultural nuance, regional etiquette. I'd worked with clients from Tokyo to São Paulo, mediated fragile contract disputes in Mandarin, negotiated logistics delays in Russian, and even once handled an emergency protocol misunderstanding with a French customs official that could have delayed a $12 million shipment. But Chase didn't know that. He didn't ask. He didn't even glance in my direction the first time we crossed paths in the hallway. He looked through me, past me, like I was a placeholder in his perfectly curated vision board of company transformation. He greeted loud sales guys by name, gave nods to marketing leads, but when he passed the quiet departments, the ones doing the actual heavy lifting, he barely blinked. I wasn't offended. I was amused. That afternoon, a small group of us gathered in the staff lounge for coffee. The kind of people who had been there before corporate transformation was trendy. Veterans, survivors. One of the senior analysts, Mark, leaned in and whispered, "He's already scheduling department reviews. Fast ones. I heard he wants to cut international consulting overhead." I stirred my coffee slowly. Let me guess. He thinks Google Translate can handle our client briefings? Mark chuckled, but it wasn't a warm sound. Probably. I didn't say more. There was no point in arguing with decisions not yet made. I'd seen young executives come and go, all convinced they were the first to discover efficiency. But this time, something felt different. Not because Chase was sharper, he wasn't, but because he was confident in ways only the profoundly unaware could be. Later that day, as I finalized a briefing packet in Mandarin and Portuguese for a Monday client presentation, my inbox pinged. Subject line, Department Realignment Review, URGENT, from Chase's assistant. Time, 4:30 p.m. Odd time, no agenda. I walked in 10 minutes early, just in case. Chase was already seated at the long table, flipping through a file I recognized as the quarterly performance reviews. My review sat on top, printed in black and white. "Natalie, right?" he said without looking up. "Yes. Appreciate you coming. We're simplifying things around here. Streamlining." He said streamlining like it was a magic spell, as if it would make inefficiency evaporate on command. "Your department is a bit specialized," he continued, "and expensive. We've decided to outsource language needs to an international firm in Singapore. It'll cut costs and consolidate operations." I stared at him for a moment, studying the careless way he said it. No malice, just assumption, as if I was an outdated tool. Effective immediately? I asked calmly. He nodded. You'll be off payroll by Sunday. HR will send your severance details. Of course, we appreciate your time here. I smiled. Not bitter, just quiet. Then I slid my laptop across the table. Well, I said, standing. Good luck with your meeting on Monday. He blinked, confused. Which meeting? You'll find out. And with that, I left the room. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry. I didn't say another word. But as I walked down that hallway, I felt the shift begin. Because some storms don't need thunder to announce themselves. They just need silence. By the time I reached the parking garage, the sun had begun to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the pavement. I stood next to my car for a moment, keys in hand, and just listened. The world above buzzed with the same Friday rush. Honking cars, phones ringing, people hurrying to be anywhere else. But down here, it was quiet. The kind of quiet that follows after something you've built has been broken. Not destroyed. Not yet. But cracked. Right down the center. I sat in the driver's seat and opened my laptop one final time before surrendering it to sleep mode. On the screen was the meeting brief I had prepared over the past 2 weeks. Mandarin, Portuguese, Arabic. Detailed points of cultural protocol. Travel preferences for visiting delegates. A list of nuanced honorifics to use when addressing the CEO from Beijing. All of it, now meaningless in the eyes of a man who thought outsourcing was the same as understanding. I closed the laptop and exhaled slowly. Let him walk into that meeting blind. The weekend passed in a strange, suspended stillness. I didn't tell many people what had happened. A few texts trickled in from colleagues, ones who had heard the news, ones too cautious to say anything. I understood. Offices like ours weren't safe places to show loyalty? Not anymore. I went for long walks, cleaned the apartment, reorganized a kitchen drawer that hadn't been touched in months. But my mind always wandered back to the same thought. He has no idea what he's done. Chase hadn't just fired an employee. He had dismantled a bridge, one carefully built over years of quiet, patient work. Relationships don't exist in spreadsheets. They live in pauses between translations, in respectful eye contact, in unspoken rituals that only matter if you've taken the time to learn why they matter. But Chase didn't deal in depth, only in optics. Sunday evening, I prepared a small folder. Not a retaliation plan. Not yet. Just documentation. Notes, screenshots, copies of emails. A short, neatly labeled USB tucked into a padded envelope. I didn't know exactly what I would do with it yet. Only that it was wise to be prepared when people in power began to stumble. And Chase would stumble. Of that, I was sure. Monday morning arrived gray and damp, with the kind of rain that makes even the city seem unsure of itself. I dressed simply. Slacks, a dark sweater, no makeup, no need for performance. I wasn't going anywhere. By 9:35 a.m., my phone began to buzz. Unknown number? I let it ring out. Second call, 9:42. Then a third, this time from the office line. I picked up, said nothing. Natalie? Came a voice. A pause. Then more urgently, this is Carla, from Chase's team. Carla was one of the new hires, young, polished, nervous now. Good morning, I said neutrally. There's a bit of an issue with the meeting this morning. The Goldreach group arrived about half an hour ago and asked for you by name. My silence stretched long enough that she filled it with apologies. We weren't aware they expected your presence. Mr. Elridge assumed the new language services vendor? They don't want a vendor, I interrupted calmly. They want someone who understands the conversation they're trying to have. Carla was quiet, then almost whispering. Would you consider coming in? Just to smooth things over? I let the question hang in the air for a full 5 seconds. No, I said finally. I don't smooth things over anymore. And I hung up. From what I later heard, the meeting was a disaster before it even began. Goldreach's VP refused to proceed until I was present. When told I had been let go, he simply stood up and left. No raised voice, no dramatic exit. Just a quiet bow and a sentence Chase didn't understand. When you remove the person who carries the relationship, you remove the relationship itself. No one in the room could explain what that meant. But the moment the delegation walked out, they understood exactly what they had lost. By lunchtime, the office buzzed with whispers. Someone had seen Chase slam a door. Someone else said the CFO looked like he'd seen a ghost. Carla sent one final message to my personal inbox. One line. I think you should know, the CEO is back from medical leave. I read it twice. Then I smiled. Because if there was one person who understood exactly what I did at Elridge Company, it was Richard Elridge. And something told me that Monday afternoon was going to be a very long one for his son. By the time Chase realized the full extent of the fallout, it was already too late. I heard from a former colleague, Mark, the one who always knew more than he said. He called that evening, his voice hushed and urgent, like he was telling me state secrets. They're panicking, he said. After Goldreach walked out, the CFO demanded an immediate debrief. Chase tried to bluff his way through it, said it was a cultural misunderstanding, that they were too rigid. I leaned back in my chair, watching the steam curl from my tea. And Richard? There was a pause on the line. Then Mark whispered. He walked in during the middle of the meeting. I imagined it clearly. Richard Elridge, graying at the temples, face thinner than before, but eyes sharp as ever. He wasn't loud. He never needed to be. His power came from the way people leaned in when he spoke, because he didn't waste words. He just stood there for a while. Mark continued. Didn't say anything. Then he asked one question. Where's Natalie? I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Mark went on. Chase tried to explain. Something about modernization, cost-cutting, third-party solutions. Richard listened. Then he turned to the CFO and asked for the Goldreach file. After that, he just left the room. Left? Yeah, no blow-up, no big speech, but his face. Mark trailed off. Chase looked like he'd been hit in the stomach. I could almost hear the grin behind his voice. Why are you telling me all this? I asked. Because you should know. The building's shifting, Natalie, and everyone's starting to realize who held it together. After the call, I sat still for a long time. Not out of satisfaction, but reflection. I hadn't orchestrated any of this. I hadn't needed to. Chase had lit the match himself. All I had done was not stop the fire from spreading. The next morning, a sleek black car pulled up in front of my apartment building. I watched from the second-floor window as a driver stepped out, checked his phone, and looked up at my unit. I didn't move. I already knew what the message would say. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. From Richard Elridge. Subject request to meet, private. The email was short, just 2 lines. Natalie, I'm deeply sorry for what occurred. I would appreciate the chance to speak with you. My office, 10 a.m. Please consider it. No pressure, no demand, just respect. I stared at the screen, weighing my options. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on. But another part, the part still carrying 9 years of loyalty, knew I needed to hear what he had to say. At 9:55, I stepped into the Elridge Company lobby one last time. It looked the same. Marble floors, tall glass panels, the faint scent of coffee and printer toner. But something was off. People weren't smiling. Conversations were clipped. A receptionist who once greeted me by name now looked up with wide eyes, unsure if I was friend or ghost. The elevator ride was silent. When I stepped into Richard's office, he was already standing. He looked tired, but not weak. A man who'd stared at his company's unraveling and returned before it collapsed. Natalie, he said quietly. Thank you for coming. I nodded. You asked. He gestured to a chair and sat across from me. No desk between us. No titles. I've made a terrible mistake, he said without hesitation. Or rather, I allowed one to be made in my absence. And it cost us a partnership I spent 12 years cultivating. It cost you more than that, I replied. But I imagine you know that now. He nodded once, solemn. Chase didn't understand what you did for us. He still doesn't. But I do. And I'm sorry. Silence settled between us. For once, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was clarifying. I'm not asking you to return, Richard said. I suspect you're already considering better opportunities, and you deserve them. But if you'd be willing, I'd like to hire you as an independent consultant, not under Chase, not under anyone. He reached into a folder and slid a document across the table. It was clean. Director, 6 months, executive-level access, full autonomy, triple my previous salary, no strings, just one sentence in bold at the bottom. This agreement cannot be amended or revoked by any current or future Elridge family member. I almost smiled, but instead, I looked Richard in the eye and said, I'll think about it. He didn't press, just nodded once with the kind of dignity most executives forget the moment power slips from their grasp. As I stood to leave, he said one last thing. You saved this company more times than Chase will ever know. If you choose not to help us again, I'll understand. But either way, I want you to know, he won't be in charge much longer. I walked out with the offer in my hand and something else in my chest. Not triumph, not revenge, something quieter, sharper, control. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I didn't rush to respond to Richard's offer. I knew better than to jump at an apology wrapped in a contract, especially one written in ink but motivated by desperation. Power, when misused, always tries to come back cloaked in humility. But true humility doesn't ask for a favor. It takes responsibility. And Chase? Chase had taken nothing but shortcuts. 3 days passed, long enough for the executive floor to grow increasingly anxious. I could feel the tension without even being there. Messages trickled into my inbox, first from HR, then the CFO, and finally from a name I hadn't seen in years, Marcia Loring, head of global partnerships. Her email was careful, full of soft corporate phrases like collaborative solutions, strategic bridge building, and the ever-reliable moving forward. But beneath the tone, I could hear what she wasn't saying. The cracks were spreading, and they needed me to stop the walls from collapsing. I responded with a single sentence. Have Chase call me directly. I didn't want a boardroom full of apologies. I wanted to see if the boy who fired me could swallow his pride. And he did. 2 hours later, my phone rang. His name lit up on the screen like a headline waiting to fail. I let it ring once, then twice. Then I picked up. Hi, Natalie, he said quickly, voice tight and rehearsed. I just wanted to reach out personally to see if we might clear the air and discuss next steps. I didn't respond. Silence has a gravity some men can't survive. He cleared his throat and pressed on. Obviously, there were misunderstandings earlier. I think we both want what's best for the company, and I believe we'd benefit from your insight as we move forward with our international partners. We, I echoed, just enough frost in the word to make him pause. Of course, your terms would be respected. He added hastily. Full consulting authority. Remote flexibility. Whatever's needed. He didn't mention the firing, the insult, the meeting I prepared that unraveled the moment I left. And that silence told me everything. You know, I said calmly, there's a phrase in Japanese. The nail that sticks out gets hammered down. But in Mandarin, there's another one. Kill the chicken to scare the monkeys. Do you know what they mean? Chase laughed nervously. I don't speak either language. I know, I said. That's why this happened. I let the silence stretch until he started to squirm again. Then I said, I'll consider the offer, but on one condition. Of course, anything. I want full access to the client database, I said. Internal memos, vendor reports, partner comm logs, everything that went through the international channels since I left. He hesitated. That's confidential. Then we're done here. No, wait. He backtracked quickly. You'll have access. I'll send the clearance forms this evening. Good, I said. Let's schedule our first meeting Monday morning. Fantastic, he said, relief creeping into his voice. Welcome back, Natalie. But I didn't say thank you, because I wasn't coming back to help him. I was coming back to see what he broke, and how deeply the damage went. Monday morning, I walked into the building like a shadow returning to claim its space. No announcement was made, no formal introduction, just a badge handed back, a guest pass converted quietly into permanent clearance, and a temporary office, a cold glass cube between legal and procurement. Not an office, a cage with windows. Perfect. I smiled politely, said nothing, and opened my laptop. By noon, I had what I needed, and by 3 o'clock, I knew the full extent of the rot. 2 major accounts had begun ghosting Elridge Company. One had flagged multiple cultural violations in their last contract draft. Another had already reached out to my former colleague, Raul, now working independently in Brazil, asking if he knew where I'd gone. And then there was the Singapore vendor, the one Chase had hired to replace me. I pulled the report. Sloppy notes, missed deadlines, tone-deaf language suggestions. The Goldreach fiasco wasn't an outlier. It was the beginning. Every client I'd once nurtured now viewed Elridge as unstable, disrespectful, unreliable. And they were right. I compiled a summary, not just a list of failures, but a roadmap of how they could have been avoided. A quiet ledger of loss. Then I scheduled a private meeting. Not with Chase, with Richard. He arrived on time, alone, tired but listening. I have what you need, I told him. But I'm not here to rebuild what your son dismantled. He nodded as if he already knew. I'm here to show him what happens when you mistake fluency for relevance and loyalty for redundancy. Richard didn't interrupt. He just asked, "What do you need?" I smiled then, cold and clean. Just space and your silence. Because revenge, when done right, isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, fluent. And Monday was just the beginning. The trick to dismantling a structure isn't to kick down the walls. It's to find the load-bearing beams, the ones no one notices, and remove them, slowly, carefully. Let gravity do the rest. That's what I did. Each morning, I arrived early, long before the suits filled the halls with artificial energy. I didn't draw attention. I didn't bark orders. I simply worked. Calm, surgical, silent. I reviewed Chase's communications with our international clients. Most were laughable. Form emails, copied and pasted translations, stripped of nuance and warmth. In a deal with a Tokyo-based firm, he had addressed the CEO by his first name in the subject line. Twice. In Portuguese, he had reversed formal and informal tone, effectively calling a senior partner bro. And in one Chinese contract, a vendor clause had been mistranslated to imply the client would cover our penalties for failure. That one nearly cost us a $12 million renewal. It wasn't just linguistic incompetence. It was cultural arrogance. I documented everything. Quietly flagged files, cross-referenced dates, logged complaints that had been buried or ignored. Each note added weight to the case I was building. Not to punish, but to prove. Prove that respect isn't optional. And Chase? He paraded through the building with performative energy. Rushed meetings, loud hallway conversations, LinkedIn posts about modern leadership in a global era. I passed him once in the break room. He gave me a tight, toothless smile. "How are things going?" he asked, like a man trying to make peace with a loaded gun. I smiled gently. Fluent. He didn't get the joke. That afternoon, I called Mr. Kenji Mori, CEO of the Japanese firm we were on the verge of losing. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, not since Richard's final trip before his health declined. Kenji answered on the first ring. "Natalie," he said, warmth evident even through the staticky connection. "You've returned?" "Briefly," I replied. "As a consultant, but I wanted to reach out before decisions are made." He was quiet a moment. Then, "Your company has forgotten our culture. Our expectations. I'm aware. And now they remember. Only because they are afraid." I didn't defend us. I didn't offer hollow apologies. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. "You were right to be offended." That silence, earned, respectful silence, is more valuable than any PR campaign. Kenji sighed. "We will delay our decision. For 1 week, but we expect more than words." "You'll have them," I said. After the call, I didn't inform Chase. I didn't need to. He hadn't even realized Kenji had stopped responding. Instead, I began restoring what had been broken. I personally rewrote the contract in Japanese, complete with appropriate honorifics, localized phrasing, and embedded etiquette notes. I attached it to a handwritten letter. Yes, an actual letter, sealed with the company's original gold-embossed stationery. A gesture that meant something. And while I did that, the cracks inside Elridge Company widened. The Brazilian firm canceled an upcoming site visit. The Indian tech partner pulled back funding for a joint research proposal. And one of our senior regional consultants resigned, citing irreconcilable leadership. The board started whispering. By Thursday, Chase looked like a man walking across cracking ice. He paced more, fumbled through presentations, called meetings that went nowhere. He tried to pin the delay with Kenji's firm on communication lag. The CFO didn't believe him. Neither did Marcia. And then came the internal memo. Marked confidential, but forwarded anyway. First to me, then to half the building. Subject line, board discussion interim director performance. That night, I stayed late in the office, sipping cold green tea from a chipped mug I had kept in my drawer since year 3. Chase's voice echoed faintly from the conference room. Fast, defensive, alone. At 9:18 p.m., I received a short text from Richard. "Final meeting, tomorrow, 8:30 a.m., my office." No other details. I sat back, letting the quiet settle around me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It never really had been. This was about truth, about competence, about the cost of underestimating the people who keep the machine running. Not loudly, but fluently, patiently, with care that can't be replicated in an app or outsourced to a stranger halfway across the world. I closed my laptop, stood slowly, and walked through the empty office. Past the glass walls, the blinking screens, the echo of short-sighted ambition. I thought of the first time I walked into this building. Young, focused, hopeful. Tomorrow I would walk in again, but not as the quiet one they forgot to ask for, as the one they'd have to answer to. The next morning, I arrived at Elridge Company 15 minutes early, not out of nerves, not to prepare. I simply wanted a moment to stand still. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that follows when people are holding their breath. Eyes tracked me as I walked across the marble floor. Some curious, some cautious, a few relieved. No one spoke. No one had to. The air said enough. I took the elevator to the top floor and stepped out into silence. Richard's assistant gave me a respectful nod and gestured toward the glass doors. Inside, the conference room was half full. Richard sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 board members I recognized from shareholder meetings. Marcia was there, so was the CFO. And at the far end of the room, in a chair slightly too large for his posture, sat Chase. He didn't look at me. I took my seat beside Richard without a word. The documents in front of me were already arranged. Neat, intentional. My report, my audit, my proposal. The room settled. Richard began. Thank you all for coming. This meeting is not disciplinary, but strategic. We've gathered to address the performance issues that have affected several of our international partnerships in recent months. No one interrupted. We've also invited Natalie here today, Richard continued, because she is the only person in this room who can explain what actually happened. He turned to me. Natalie? I didn't speak right away. I opened the folder and slid the first document across the table. This, I said, is a timeline of the Elridge International Division over the past 90 days. A second sheet. This is a log of all miscommunications, missed cultural markers, and contract breaches made by our Singapore-based vendor, hired without vetting to replace me. Then a third. This is a breakdown of revenue lost or currently at risk due to partner disengagement. I let the silence stretch between each page. None of these issues existed before I was dismissed, I said simply. Across the table, one of the board members adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. You're saying these losses directly stem from Chase's decision to eliminate your position? I'm not saying that, I replied. The partners are. I opened my final document. These are direct statements from 3 international partners, including Kenji Mori, declaring their willingness to return under one condition. The room waited. I looked directly at Chase. That I stay, and that he steps down. Chase finally looked up. His face had the stiffness of someone trying to hold back emotion but not knowing which one. He opened his mouth, but Richard raised a hand. No more spin, Chase, he said quietly. We've seen the numbers, heard the silence. But Chase began, then stopped. There was nothing left to say. Richard turned to the board. Effective immediately, I'm reinstating myself as active CEO. Chase will take an indefinite leave from operations, and the interim leadership board will reevaluate the structure of the Global Partnerships Department. The vote was unanimous. I said nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at Chase again. I gathered my papers. As I stood, Richard said, Natalie, if you're willing to stay, I'd like you to lead the reconstruction of our international strategy team. I paused, then smiled. Not wide, not sharp. Just complete. I'll need a new office, I said. Richard smiled back. Pick one. As I stepped out into the hallway, I passed Chase. He didn't speak, but I did, quietly. You fired me because you didn't understand what I did. You brought me back hoping I'd save what you broke. But I didn't come back for you, Chase. He blinked, still not meeting my eyes. I came back so you'd see the difference between holding power and deserving it. And I walked on. That afternoon, I sat in a sunlit corner office on the 12th floor. The desk was empty. Clean. A fresh start. I opened my laptop, sipped a cup of jasmine tea, and typed my first email of the day. To Kenji Mori. Subject, renewal, with respect. As I hit send, I thought about everything that had happened. Not just the loss, the insult, the firing, but the assumption behind it. That experience can be replaced. That loyalty doesn't matter. That relationships are disposable. They were wrong. You can't outsource fluency. You can't automate trust. And if you mistake silence for weakness, don't be surprised when the quiet ones bring the whole system down. With precision, not noise. Some endings don't come with applause. They come with restored balance. And that's more than enough.